I got a bone to pick with the dwarves. And just to be clear, I have no problem with their backstories, or the lore that they've been given over the years. My problem isn't with any of that. It's with their designs. Most of the time, they're visually depicted as people whose most fantastical trait is simply being that they're short. We already have those in real life. For me, their visual designs often lack whimsy. The default dwarf just isn't fantasy enough for my tastes. And yes, I know that technically that's how they were described in the original mythology, but that's been done so many times, and I want to do my own take. So I'm going to keep what I think are the essential traits of the dwarf, and change the rest to my liking. My design constraints are: I have to keep them short, I must give them beards, and their designs must clearly indicate that they live underground. The idea of where I'd source these elements came to me quickly, that being moles, with a little bit of groundhog mixed in there. They're the quintessential underground creatures. Well, besides worms, I guess. But those things aren't nearly as adorable, so I'm going with these guys for the main visual inspiration. I thought it would be interesting to have two main varieties of dwarves, one based on the common yard mole, and the other based on the star-nose mole. I sketched out several faces to explore a wide range of facial features and expressions, because I really dislike when a non-human species in media has every individual look exactly the same. I don't like that, so I'm gonna do my best to include as much variety in face and body type as possible. These dwarves do grow beards, but I wanted to invoke the idea without having to give literally every single one of them a full face of hair. So instead of covering them all in thick beards, I gave these dwarves thick whiskers. I think it still invokes the idea of a lot of facial hair and a rugged, hairy look, while opening up to me more design possibilities. Another idea I wanted to loosely stick to is that, in many fantasy stories, dwarves are depicted as being very friendly with humans, and I like that. Because of this, I wanted to design these dwarves to feel like creatures I could easily imagine humans associating with, or growing fond of. Moving on to their clothing, I wanted to take clear inspiration from Norse culture and dress. Since dwarves originate from that region's mythology, I want this to show up in the patterns and the materials and the overall construction of what they wear. That being said, I wanted to introduce alongside the Norse influences in their clothing, I wanted to put a bit of American workwear in there. Things like overalls, thick leather, boots, and other practical, rugged clothing. Another major visual element would be dragons. I think their presence would influence dwarven technology and design language. In the distant past, these dwarves would have worshipped dragons as gods. They lived in mountains and caves, and so did certain types of dragons. So I imagine a symbiotic relationship formed between the two. Dragons are clever beings with silver tongues, skilled at manipulation and persuasion, in exchange for protection and a limited magical knowledge. The dwarves would bring the dragons treasures and riches, which hold high status in dragon culture, alongside food and sacrifices. Although this relationship eventually fractured, that ancient era where dragons were worshipped as living deities, fire-breathing tyrant protectors who granted arcane knowledge, beyond mortal comprehension would have left a lasting mark. That influence still lingers in dwarven culture and clothing. Because of this, I like the idea that dwarven creations prominently feature dragon iconography and motifs. The goal is to explore unique ways of depicting the dragon theme. I want to start simple by drawing a basic dwarf soldier that you see right now on screen, using the helmet as a dragon's head, and his orange fur acting as fire when his beard pokes out of the bottom of the helmet, along with him wearing scaled chainmail armor. I imagine this particular dwarf being a skilled smith and warrior, with a bit of a perfectionist streak. After fighting in several battles, he lost a leg and replaced it with a golden prosthetic, meant to replicate his original leg as closely as possible. He could have gone for a more simple design, but I imagine he gains a sense of pride, showing off how well he's able to replicate how his leg looked before. And to close it out, I had to include a dwarf with a flamethrower, because that's just cool. Now, these kinds of weapons are generally frowned upon, and even banned within dwarven society, due to their nature and how they function. In the underground caverns where the dwarves live, there are creatures known as fire slugs. These slugs produce a flammable, oily, mucus-like substance, and when they become stressed, they produce even more of it. So putting a bunch of these slugs in a tank, or more like a big cooking pot, it causes them to be all stressed out, and the stress causes them to secrete all this liquid fire gel, which then flows through a tube made from specialized fireproof snake skin, and when it reaches the end of the tube it is shot out, where it gets lit on fire, spilling out as bursts of intense flame. Most dwarves consider this practice extremely cruel, because the stress often leads to the slug's deaths. It's also just very dangerous if something with the flamethrower breaks or malfunctions. So such weapons are only ever brought out for foreign or existential threats in dire times of need. Now, as for what the dwarf is wearing, I thought it would be cool to put in a kind of medieval version of a hazmat suit, so I took inspiration from the closest equivalent from real life being a plague doctor's outfit. So it's mainly made of a bunch of leathers sewn together tight for protection against the flames, with glass lenses and special plant herbs put into the big sacs on the sides of the face to help with air filtration, to get all the bad chemicals. The plant inside of them would at least somewhat help to absorb them. At least that would be the idea. So yeah, that's my dwarves. If you got any suggestions on how I could make this better, or just make the videos better in general, I'd appreciate it. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. It really helps to motivate me. Anyway, I hope all of you keep it green.